Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, a free site. Also, always 1776.com. Another way to get to that site is keepingitfree.blogspot.com, a free site. You know, YouTube contacted me and told me that I was eligible to post products for sale, tag products that consumers could buy, and that if they bought those products, I would earn a commission. So I had a decision to make on which products I would post. Now, let me just point out that one of my goals in life is to help people figure out the financial system, right? Because I was raised in a house, quite frankly, and my parents were spectacular, but they were immigrants, right? You know, as far as I know, my parents never held a stock in their lives, right? My dad was the immigrant who was reading the business section really out of curiosity, not to buy stocks, right? So I know there are a lot of people like me who don't fully understand or grasp the financial implications of things immediately, like someone would who was raised in Newport Beach, Beverly Hills, right? Pacific Palisades, Park Avenue. So I decided that what I would do is I would post links to investments that I thought were great investments. In other words, these are the kind of investments that pay for themselves over time. So let me just say, on this day when Nvidia announced earnings and a lot of people were on pins and needles, right? Nvidia knocked the ball out of the park. A lot of people are breathing easier, while the folks in the neighborhood where I was raised have no idea that Nvidia released earnings. Let's talk about why I've picked Rolex, gold, and silver to be the items I've tagged that are available for sale. Right? In other videos, I will tag other products that I believe beat inflation. You'll notice in the description of my videos, I actually say consider Rolex, gold, and silver as inflation hedges. Right? There is the school of thought right now, particularly with the Japanese 10-year reaching a new high for the time period, right? A whopping 1.7%, but still it's high relative to past performance. There is a lot of fear that we're headed into an inflationary era, right? I lived through the 1970s. I know what that's like. So let's talk about money briefly here, just an overview. Let's explain some things. When I was a kid, I didn't fully understand this. I'm hoping there's a kid watching this video who's going to gain some insight on some parts of finance, right? Maybe you have that friend who has the expensive car under wraps in his or her garage that they don't drive, right? And you are at the guy's house. He says, hey man, I want to show you something. Then you're in the guy's garage and he shows you that he's bought a Ferrari, right? Or, we'll live in fantasy land here. Let's say he has a Lamborghini or some car like that, and he doesn't drive it. You're thinking to yourself, what's the point of this, man? How could you have this ride that's going to turn many heads, and yet you're keeping it in the garage? What's the point of that? folks, the point of that is the resale value of the car. The point of that is that a car in pristine condition, right? One that hasn't been in an accident, one that doesn't have a lot of miles on it, one that doesn't have wear and tear, might actually appreciate in value. Right? Let me just say, financially savvy people think differently than everyone else. It takes a while to figure out that that car that your friend is not driving, that he's keeping housed in a garage, might actually be paying for the garage. It might actually be paying for a portion of your friend's lifestyle. Let's take it further. You're in a friend's crib, you look on the wall, there's some paintings. You know your friend isn't an art connoisseur, right? You know, he's not the kind of guy who is, visiting art galleries, but yet he has this piece of art on the wall. And you're laughing internally and you're thinking, wow, this guy's trying to put on a show, isn't he? Right? Some people won't even have the art on the wall. They won't even have the art in their house. They'll have the art in storage. Because understand, the art is not really there to be seen. The art is actually an investment that is appreciating in value. Right? It's an appreciating asset. It's making the holder money. Right? So, let me just say, I mentioned Rolex as an inflation hedge. Right? I mentioned gold and silver as inflation hedges. Now, we live in an era of artificial intelligence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read a portion of a printout I got from Grok, right? An AI protocol, right? And this actually has real numbers. I don't want people to feel that we're in the world of solely abstraction. What I want them to do is to actually hear the numbers for an era we all lived through, right? And just think about the idea of an investment that pays for itself. Before I start, let me say there's an excellent show on Apple TV, I believe. It stars John Hamm. It's a series. It's one of the best things on TV. In the series, John Hamm, who's been living, we'll call it a upper middle class life, turns to a life of crime after he has bills stack up on him. His wife leaves him for another man. He has to pay her alimony. He has a lot of carrying costs because the life he's living has him owning homes, carrying mortgages. He has a financial advisor. We see him at his country club. Right, folks, this isn't an episode of Dallas from the early 80s with J.R. Ewing, right? They're not trying to flash wealth to show you that these people can afford it. No, they're actually showing you a lifestyle that the John Hamm character is living that he can't afford. Right? So he breaks into a friend's house and he has to grab some assets that are going to make him money. So what does he grab? He grabs some watches that the friend never wears, that the friend has solely for investment purposes. They actually talk about the types of watches. Hamm, who isn't a professional thief, then tries to fence one of the watches, and the people who, are at the pawn shop, they actually then start making phone calls about him because they understand the price he's offering the watch for is well below market value. And they know the real owner wouldn't make such a sale. So, with that in mind, I'm going to read from Grok, right? Historical data shows Rolex secondary market prices rising at rates far above inflation, even during economic volatility. For instance, from 2010 to 2020, while U.S. CPI inflation totaled about 20%, the average Rolex trading price doubled from $5,200 to $10,600, a 104% increase. Over the past decade, 2013 to 2023, second-hand Rolex watches appreciated at an average annual rate of 7%, surpassing CPI inflation, which was cumulatively during that time period 30 to 35%, and even outperforming the S&P 500 in some analyses. The trend continued into 2025, with gold Rolex models benefiting from a 34% year-over-year gold price surge in 2024, reinforcing their role as a wearable hedge. Right now, folks, just understand that Rolex has outperformed several benchmarks over the past 10 years, as analyzed by Bob's Watches and McKinsey. Right? Gold. Understand, during the time period we're mentioning, 2013 to 2023, gold had a 40% total rate of return. Folks, that's huge. Rolex, by comparison, had a 100 to 150% rate of return for top models. So you have a friend. If your friend has hit it big, your friend might have some Rolexes. Right? I need for folks to understand that it's not a taxable event until you sell. So, I'm sure there are many people watching this video who, plan to give their kids their gold or give their kids their Rolexes, right? It's kind of like the comic book collector who has the rare comic book, or the baseball card collector who has the rare baseball card in pristine condition that he understands is appreciating in value, that he understands he's not going to get taxed on until he sells that asset. Right? So, for the videos where I am tagging items which are available for purchase, I want you to realize that I'm not tagging them. I'm someone who likes to wear casual clothes. You can tell just looking at the clothes I wear in videos. I'm someone who prefers to go unshaven. Right? I'm not someone who is trying to look flashy. Right? Rather, I'm someone who wants to set it and forget it. Right? Grant Cardone, a famous author, talks about how the secret to wealth is having a drip. Right? It's having, in his case, real estate, right? Bitcoin, he's a Bitcoin investor. It's having that investment that pays for itself over time. And if you understand wealth management, understand that if I have a Rolex that's appreciating in value, or if I have a Bitcoin that's appreciating in value, I don't have to trigger a taxable event. What I could do is pledge it as collateral for a loan. In other words, the Rolex is appreciating in value, and I'm getting liquidity off the Rolex without selling it, without being obligated to pay taxes. Right, so I do hope as you follow my videos, when you see things available for purchase, click on that link and just look at the items, right? And understand, my game is really about freedom, right? One of my financial sites, blogs, is keeping it free.blogspot.com. That's my end game, right? It's not to look flashy and stuff like that. I'm more comfortable wearing sweats than looking flashy, right? I'm someone who, when I go to Laguna Beach, I'm just interested in hanging out on the sand. I'm not interested in, being, in some fancy looking home just to have the address, right? If you're that way, you want to have investments that give you a drip, that pay for themselves. Understand, Coinbase right now, believe it or not, is making collateralized loans on Bitcoin, for example, where you have no repayment schedule, right? You tell them, okay, if I default on this loan, you get this Bitcoin. And they give you the money to do whatever you want with it, right? If you have that daughter who's getting married and you need to pay for that wedding, you can pay for that wedding. You can give your daughter that great memory, right? And then, of course, you can pay back the loan and get back your Bitcoin. You want assets that appreciate in value, right? For some of my videos, I've picked Rolex, gold, and silver. I encourage you to use AI to find out how historically those assets have performed as inflation hedges. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.